Kia ora team, welcome back to The Distant Vale. My name's Harry, and today we'll be painting up a bust, something a little bit bigger on the channel today, and it is the Lady of Shadows from Bite the Bullet Studios. It's going to be a lot of painting skin tones today, and because it took me probably close on 12 hours to paint this mini up, I will be splitting it into a couple of different parts. So today we'll be focusing on the skin tones, and in the next video I'll be working through the makeup, jewellery and clothing in here, because each of those steps, whilst a little bit more complicated than the skin, did take a little bit less time as compared to the volume of skin that I painted. So I really hope you enjoy, and I look forward to seeing you guys at the end. Right, to start off today, let's have a look at the completed model. So I've gone for a more sort of ruddy red skin tone, and this is going to help contrast a little bit more with the cloth and jewellery colours I've selected down the track. Up, we're just going to run some white ink through an airbrush, spray on some zenithal highlights to establish our light to dark gradients. And it's going to make life a lot easier down the track, as painting skin can be a little bit of a challenge if you're not used to thinking with volumes in mind, and that zenithal highlight just helps to establish that to start with. The first colour we're going to be laying down is Fur Brown from the Army Painter, part of their War Paints Fanatics. And with this Fur Brown, what we're going to be doing is basically finding all the sort of black and dark grey parts of the bust and painting that in with Fur Brown, but leaving the sort of mid to light greys and the whites completely alone. What this is going to do is it's going to mean we're only having to cover a few areas with paint. It's quite a big model, it's quite a lot of skin, and it makes it a lot easier to keep the texture of the paint smooth and consistent. What it also does is it helps to train us to think a little bit more with those sort of volumetric sort of highlights and shades in mind. So we can just very gently build up where we already see the black with just this color, and sort of see step by step the shape left behind. The other thing it does is it makes sure that we can maximize that zenithal highlight to its fullest extent. If I just cover this all up with a couple of solid coats of the Fur Brown, it would really diminish the intensity of that highlight, and then by the time I'm coming through with the second and third colours I'm going to be putting down in this model, there's not really going to be a lot of that really crisp white paint left going through, and I kind of want that to really help make the final highlight as intense as possible. But you're sort of getting that 2-for-1, that training exercise of thinking about shapes differently, especially when you've got a model that's a bit bigger than what you're used to painting. Having that extra room to play around really helps to take your painting skills to another level. When it comes time to paint the face, the shadows that we're really thinking about the most are the bottom of the jaw, the little depression underneath the cheekbone, the inner crease of the nose, and the underside of the brows. We're almost going to be using a little bit of like a contouring technique from women's makeup to help carve a face shape onto the miniature and help to exaggerate some of the shapes that are already present on the mini, and help introduce a little bit of variation to the model that isn't already sculpted there. When it comes time to do a second coat of this Fur Brown, what you want to do is you want to really push that second coat mostly to those deepest shadowed recesses on the model shapes. This makes sure that when we go through to cover things up, it helps to establish a nice thin color to transition into, but it also helps to cut down a little bit on the painting time. We don't really need to focus on creating too much blocking in at this point. With these colors, they will be mostly covered over by the end. And now, unfortunately, I'm still getting used to setting up for filming, and the whites on the Mini have just kind of blown the colors out. So apologies for a few of the shots here where things are going to look very wonky, just because that light balance is off. And with those shapes in, we're finished with the first color. We are very much going to be moving into just trust me territory as we move on to the next step, which will be the first of the two midtones. So I've gone ahead and grabbed some topaz skin as our first midtone from the Army Painter. And what we're going to be doing is same as what we did with the fur brown, finding the area of the zenithal that we want to cover over with this midtone. So it's going to be the darker greys into the sort of mid grey that is left on the Mini, as well as helping to cover over a little bit of the fur brown where I feel like I maybe have overreached where that block is. And with this one, we want to be a little bit more thoughtful about putting down solid blocks of color. It is going to look a little bit more like a cell shaded like cartoon by the time we finish these mid-tone steps. But what that's going to mean is we've got some nice clear lines to go back and glaze over to help smooth that transition out. And again, I think it's really good the first few times you're starting to paint these larger models that you really start to think more about the volume of the shape that you are coloring and shading in rather than relying on some of the shortcuts we can use on smaller minis where we can let something like a contrast paint do a lot of that shape and shadow work for us. When you've got big flat panels of skin tones which have some sort of natural variation in them, when you're looking at a real person, we can't really rely on a single paint to do that kind of looking for us. We have to paint those details in. And what you'll find is that if you practice these sorts of things on bigger miniatures, it makes painting the smaller details later on a lot easier. You've trained your brain to start thinking about those shapes on the models differently to how you would when you're first starting out. When it comes to the face, we really want to be thinking about using this first midtone as a shadow on some of the raised areas, because again, it's not always a nice clear cut. This is your shade across the model, this is your midtone, this is your highlight. If we're thinking about real shapes, you can have your midtone be the highlight on the dark side and have it be a shadow somewhere else in the model. Your brain will do the heavy lifting down the track. So we're going to move on to our second midtone, which is going to be Jasper Skin. So again, this is all from the Army Painter. This is all in that sort of ruddy brown to sort of Caucasian pale yellow color tones. And with this, the way you want to think about it is we're trying to just cover everything except the areas of purest white, and bringing it a little bit onto that topaz skin. Again, creating some nice easy shapes for our eye to read later on when we start to glaze, and to also help to add a little bit of visual interest and definition. So and around the stomach and the ribs we can start to highlight some rib shapes or paint in some rib shapes if they're not already sculpted, and then around the neck and the collarbone we start to add some very light shapes across the top to again give things a bit of definition and a bit more visual interest. And with that second mid-tone in, the only thing left to do now is start to paint in our highest highlights. So we'll be using a Barbarian Flesh from the Army Painter, and this is much more towards the yellow end of those sort of rosy pinks. And with this, we're really just trying to cover over any leftover raised areas of white, as well as just to first very lightly start to introduce some first highlights on some areas that we know that are a bit more prominent. So around the fingers and the sort of knobbly bits on hands, those can be really easy areas to start your highlights. as well as any upward facing sort of firmer edges around the ribs, the jaw, the cheeks, and especially on the nose to help give that a bit more shape and definition. You can also see here that I'm not using just straight lines and solid strokes lines with the paintbrush. I'm actually doing a little bit of almost like stippling with the tip of the brush, just to help make those highlights not sort of stand out too strongly on some areas of the body. There aren't normally many harsh bright lines on organic shapes, but with that highlight done, pretty much everything is on the Mini now. What we want to now move towards is starting to think about blending out those shapes, establishing good sort of visual language for what we're trying to tell on the model. So I'm going to come back through with that fur brown. I'm going to thin it down to a glaze consistency, so it's like 4 or 5 parts water to 1 part paint. And what we're doing with that is I want it to be thin so that it's drying on with just the barest amount of coverage. And I'm using this to go through and just start to paint some areas that I've left a bit too bright with the midtones. And I'm going to help use it to create a bit more shadow where I want there to be visual interest, spaces around the face and around the cleavage and collarbones. But also I've kept a little bit of the full paint on the palette just to go through and cover up any areas where things maybe haven't dried or I've gone ahead and rubbed off as we've been moving the miniature around. The wonderful handle that I've got here is great, but the blue tack not so much. The Mini tends to move around quite a lot, and I was having to readjust it quite a lot in bits of footage that I've cut out, and that was rubbing a bit of paint. Right, with those shadows sort of painted in a little bit more strongly, we're going to do our first transition glazing step. So I'm going to take a bit of the fur brown, I'm going to mix it to a 50-50 color ratio, so not exactly 50-50 paint, but enough topaz skin is being added to the fur brown that visually that look like it's about halfway between those two tones. Blend it down again, quite a lot of water to a small amount of paint, and I'm now applying this just to those transition lines between the first mid-tone and that fur brown base color, sort of shadow color. And I'm just going to work my way around the model, adding that in, as well as to any areas of the second mid-tone or the first mid-tone that I want to just tint down a little bit. And again, we're just trying to work with this, playing with the volumes and the shapes on the bust. Given that things are a little bit bigger, we can spend a bit more time trying to make these transitions a bit smoother. It's a lot easier doing this on a model this big rather than on like a Space Marine Fate, where there's not really a lot of room on the Mini to get the brush and to do these kinds of stepwise glazes and transitions. And with that round of glazing done, we're on to the next step, which is going to be more glazing. This time we're going to take a mix between the topaz skin and jasper skin. Again, mixing up so it looks like it's a 50-50 sort of split halfway between those two colours. Thinning it right down so that we're left with just a very thin consistency and very thin coverage of paint. And then we're just working that across those transition lines. And if you're finding that when you're doing your glazing steps on your own minis, and you're finding that the lines, that sort of glaze is not really covering things over or sort of blending those layers out, chances are you're just not doing enough layers, or you're trying to apply too much glaze at once and it's pooling on itself and creating more of like a tide mark or like a cup stain on the miniature. So when in doubt, thin it down, lots of layers, and if you're not sure if it's doing anything, knock a bit more paint off the brush and just keep working at it. And once we're sort of happy with the blending out between the two midtones, what we can do is then mix up another 50-50 color between the Barbarian Flesh and the Jasper Skin, and then again work this round, glaze out those transitions, and help to lighten up any areas where maybe we've gone a bit too dark. And although we've sort of broken this down step by step, when I was painting this mini, I was going back and forth between all these different sort of halfway colors. Anywhere that I felt like it wasn't quite dark enough or it was too light, I was coming back in with either a 50-50 color or sometimes even the original color. One of those original 4 colors to tint and tone and just keep working at it. This is why it took me so long. I think I spent maybe close on 7 hours just getting the skin painted to the level where I was happy. I don't often spend this long on minis, but I felt like I was in the zone and I just wanted to keep working on it. Not that my back or my neck felt particularly good by the end of that, but it was really fun just to work at polishing a skill which I've not historically been very confident with. Right, and with all that glazing done, we should have a lot of nice smooth transitions between the different skin tones. So the next thing we want to do is to add a bit more sort of saturation and richness to the skin tone. And to do that, I've made up a very thin glaze of magenta from Vallejo, their model color range. So it's like 10 parts water, 1 part paint. I've put it on a big brush and I'm just sloshing it all over the mini, and then coming back through and wicking a lot of it off. What I'm trying to do here is use it a little bit like a wash paint, and a little bit like a toning paint, where it's just going to dry very, very thinly and just tint everything back towards that sort of warm magenta, and it helps to make the skin look a little bit more lived in. And then anywhere where I feel like I've maybe not got quite enough, once the first layer is dried, I'm just coming back in with a little bit more of the same mix and just manually adding in some more shade or some more tint to areas that I want to have a little bit more of a warm, sort of rich blood looking skin tone. The weird thing to say, but we want to try to make this look as little like sort of pale washed out flesh as you can, by introducing things like these magentas, blues, purples, to add a bit of richness to it. When I'm happy with the darker layers having dried where I want them to dry, I'm just going back through with a bit of water on a brush, and I'm just taking a bit of time to clean up any areas where the magenta might have sort of pulled or created a sort of stain mark. And I'm just using that little bit of water to reactivate the paint and push it away from maybe some of those flat areas that I want to keep clear and clean. And a few other areas I've kind of left it as it is. There's a few cool spots around the arms and on the hips where it had dried, almost like veins. They had a little bit of like a crinkle and a crease to them. So I thought those were kind of cool, and I've left them in a couple of places around the mini. But otherwise, I wanted a few areas to look a bit more clean and smooth. So this is that time to do it. And if you're going to do this step, best to do it within about 5-10 minutes of that paint drying, when it's the most easy to work with and reactivate with just a bit of water. with that done, the first step on painting the skin tones on this Lady of Shadows is done. Thank you very much for sticking around. I hope you have all enjoyed today. What we're going to be looking forward to is a part 2, where I go through painting the cloth, the non-metallic metals on the jewellery, the makeup and the hair. But until next time, I'll catch you guys around. Bye!